So this presentation really evolved from the realization that most people have never heard of Gestalt psychotherapy. And as a practitioner, I do feel a personal responsibility to help educate people of its existence and its useful application. So as I evolve in my psychotherapy and coaching practice, I continue to see how the two fields are interrelated. So the intent for tonight is really to take our agile coaching practices beyond focusing on execution and delivery and borrow from Gestalt psychotherapy. So you'll notice there's a lot of value. I think there's 7 bullets, but just for our sake of time, we're really going to focus on the top 3. And this is developing greater awareness of how we show up in our interactions with others and looking at new techniques to solve stressful and conflict situations. We're also going to explore some techniques on how to become kind of greater truth tellers, both to ourselves and with others. So you might be wondering, let me just next page. You might be wondering, well, who is this Lisa Bradburn person? So to sum it up very quickly for you, I love people. I love working with people. I think it's important to explore and try new things. Another philosophy of mine is to really keep an open mind to the many possibilities of life. And given my passions, coaching and psychotherapy are 2 well-suited professions. Okay. Hold on, there we go. All right. So I have a question for you. And the question is, which scenario describes the role of a psychotherapist versus an agile coach? So let me just give you a moment to read both scenarios and feel free to write your answer in the chat. Okay. Aha, it'd be helpful if I see the chat. There we go. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of really great answers here. A bit of a mix. Some people are saying both. Some people are saying, I think if I look way up, there's a person said the first is an agile coach. Yes. So this is a little bit of a trick question, and I think most of you kind of got my trick. It is both. So both scenarios do apply to both psychotherapy and agile coaching. I'll have to make my trick a little bit more devious next time. Okay, so if we continue on. So that's right, there really is a fine line between agile coaching and psychotherapy. Great, so let's dig a little bit deeper. Now, this is a pretty intense slide with a lot of information. We're not going to go through each line. I do believe this presentation will be available to you at a later time. So I'm just going to give you a quick history of psychotherapy. So essentially, psychotherapy is a relatively new profession. It's evolved at the dawn of the 20th century. So psychotherapists are mental health professionals who specialize in talk therapy. So this is like an all-encompassing term for those who deal, with stress, anxiety, or other emotional challenges. And a high percentage of people who enter into psychotherapy as a profession have done so because maybe they've been in the trenches, they've overcome some personal challenges through using therapy. And I would say that a similar entry point is the same for Agile coaches who've really kind of walked the walk. That's why you see, maybe a lot of Scrum Masters heading into Agile coaching. So they've really been in the trenches. But let's pluck out 3 key concepts from this chart. And really, that is, a psychotherapist supports the interpersonal needs of a client or group. So they can work one-on-one or in a group scenario. An Agile coach supports the organization to create value from building products. And to achieve this, a coach either works vertically or horizontally with individuals, teams, and the enterprise to support that value proposition. So really a core difference would be, an Agile coach is not there to delve into, individual personal challenges. Take, for example, marital issues or substance abuse or depression. And the description that I do have written here does come directly from Lisa Atkins. But let's look at some of these similarities together. Just move this little box here. Here we go. So both will promote healthy behavior. I love the next bullet, and that's that reflective observer and truth teller. Both really do want to do that co-creation of a safe container to work with their clients. And we see a lot of experiential, experimental sense of play. There's a lot of interplay between these 3. And then they do take a lot of practices from other modalities as well. I have here an art therapy, but also mindfulness. We see a lot of practices that come into play with both psychotherapy and Agile coaching. Okay. So let's move on to the next slide. I know this is a lot to unpack, so let me know if you have any questions so far. We're just going to do a pause for reflection. So now that we know some of the differences between a psychotherapist and an Agile coach, I'm curious if you've ever walked a fine line between the 2. So feel free to add your answer in the chat. Okay. Yeah, Mary is saying yes very often, and Brian, yes, we need to build up when guiding. Kyle is saying every day. That's a lot, Kyle. And Mary, yes, I have. A lot of the things that stand in the way of successful teams are interpersonal issues. Fully agree with you. And Janet says a firm yes. And I hope I'm saying your name right. Pio Park, you're saying no, but it looks like you're kind of thinking you got your ... So we've got a few different answers here. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So one of the common denominators is really the sameness of qualities of people drawn into these professions. So we see a really deep focus on people who have empathy. They're really holding that space with patience. There's a high level of self-awareness. You really need to have an understanding of what triggers you when you're working with others and what are your reactive states, as well as those judgment and personal biases. And so it's a pretty big list, and there's similarities and synergies between the 2. Okay, so before we proceed, so that was just a little bit of theory to kind of get us going. Really, let's recap on these core concepts before we move ahead. So as we saw, psychotherapists focus more on mental health, whereas the Agile coach supports the organization as a whole to really derive value from building products. And as we saw, to achieve this, they're going to work across the organization, both vertically, horizontally, it could be with an individual, could be teams, and the enterprise as a whole. And then of course, as we saw, there's the same soft skills. Great. Now let's head into Gestalt psychotherapy. So I'm just going to give you a Coles Notes brief history before we dive in. So Gestalt philosophy was founded in Germany and Austria, harking back to around the 1920s, and it became very popular in Europe. So Fritz Perls is a German-born psychotherapist, and his wife Laura popularized Gestalt psychotherapy in the 1940s and 50s. So after the Second World War, they moved to New York City, as a lot of people did, and they started their psychotherapy practice out of their apartment, if you can imagine. And then in the early 60s, Fritz moved to Big Sur in California. And really from there, Gestalt took off like wildfire. It took off in North America, and it really continues to gain in popularity today. So this practice has certainly evolved since the 60s. And as more research unfolds in these areas, the practice continues to deepen. So that was just a little bit of background. Okay, so how do we pronounce the word? Because it's a funny word to say. I'm just going to say it for you. So Gestalt. Hopefully, there's a bit of a in there. Gestalt. So it is a German word. There you go. I think I must have pressed my audio. Okay, whoops. So let's look at the definition. So Gestalt simply means the whole is more important than the individual parts. And that's the most basic definition. And when we think of a human, the wholeness of a person includes the mind and body connection rather than a collection of all these different parts. So let's take a look at this from maybe another angle. So let's take a celebrity, Kim Kardashian, for example. So she's more than just a reality star. She's also a mom. She's an entrepreneur, but at her core, at her wholeness, she is a human being. So that is the definition of Gestalt. Okay, but what is Gestalt psychotherapy? Well, there are many different schools of psychotherapy, and Gestalt is simply one modality. It does take a humanistic approach, which emphasizes an individual's inherent drive towards self-actualization and creativity. And the key concepts, I'm going to really focus on three of them, and that is the here and now. So for example, Gestaltists, or people who study Gestalt, do not necessarily look back in childhood to explain someone's behavior. Rather, we acknowledge the past, but are more interested in exploring how you are impacted right here and right now in this very, very moment. Gestalt is also relational. So I know a lot more about myself through my relationship with my dad. How I operate, how I react, how I respond are all characteristics of who I am. And bodily awareness. So there is this need to be in tune with our internal thoughts, feelings, emotions, and how does this impact us physically? So for example, after I speak with like an agitated coworker, I tend to rub my temples a lot. It's just a physical reaction that I'm noticing that I have. So I don't know if any of you on the call, if something is kind of triggered inside of you, if you feel like there's something physical that kind of manifests from And then finally, Gestaltists are always students. So those who are practitioners and also patients of Gestalt, they're always going to be lifelong learners and called students. And I would say very similar for Agile coaches. We're always learning, and I mean, that's why you're here tonight. So, all right. Well, let's perform a quick experiment. So take a look at this picture. And I just want you to gauge kind of what feelings you're experiencing inside of your body right now. So feel free if you want to write in the chat as we go along. Is there anything coming up inside your body right now? Yeah, Mary's saying anxiety. Mm-hmm. Brian's saying, wondering why the dog is mad, and Mary's laughing. Yeah, I did have a friend, tension from Craig. I had a friend actually tell me that they thought that the dog was laughing, but no, indeed, it is an angry dog. How do we know that we're feeling kind of these internal feelings? I don't know about you, but generally when I'm anxious or scared, I feel a change in my breathing, kind of get a little sweaty maybe, or just uncomfortable. Like there's some physical changes that start to happen. And then where are you experiencing these sensations in your body? Yeah, Janet, increased heart rate. Katrine, calmness. So again, for me, when I look at the dog and I get a little frightened by this picture, I notice that I'm experiencing the sensations here, kind of up around that heart, like Janet, you had just mentioned. That's right. So the reason why I wanted to show you this picture is just to tell you a quick personal story as well, and that's about my dog, Aster. Aster is a rescue dog who sadly previously lived with an abusive male owner. So today she can be quite volatile, even with me, despite the fact that she wags her tail. And so when I sense my own internal fear, it feels like a wave is running up and down my body. And in the past, I used to ignore this fear and I would just sort of jump right in and play with Aster, but often with biting results. So I know now with experience that today when I feel fear, I know it's not the right time to engage with my dog. I pause, I kind of let that wave pass, I shake it off. And then once it's passed and I know that my internal core is calm, I'm ready to be with my dog again. And Aster really senses that calmness, and then she's quite stable with me and there's no problems. So nice story, great, but how does this apply to Agile coaching? And Brian and Marty, I see your comments as well. I know it's a sad situation, but I promise you Aster is in a very loving, happy home now. Okay, so why are we talking about this? Let me just get to the next slide. Yes, tying it together. Well, if we continue quickly with the dog analogy, so when we encounter a scary dog, we are experiencing these physical, emotional changes like increased heart rate. Sometimes there's cortisol that would be pumping through our body, which is that stress hormone. And then we experience these fright and flight sensations in the nervous system. But let's also compare this with a gentle therapy dog who calms the nervous system. And dogs have a heightened sense of emotional intelligence, and they're very much aware of our human state of being. Now, with coaching, most often, self-aware humans also are able to detect that emotional state of other humans as well. So our holistic state is kind of in the field for all to experience, whether we like it or not. And when I say the field, this is a psychotherapy term to describe the container that we have with our clients. And as coaches, the best way we can self-regulate is really to understand and accept our own physical and emotional response in the here and now. So this is how we remain authentic to ourselves and with others. Okay, so are there any questions or comments? Before we move into the 3 exercises, I'm just going to quickly check our chat. Lisa, I'm muted. Oh. Uh-oh. Oh, hold on a sec. That was the beginning. Let me go down. Okay, so no questions so far. All right. I thought I was muted for a minute there. I am not, so that's great. Okay, so now we're going to jump in to the 3 exercises. So the first is Gestalt as real physical beings. We're going to do a little bit of theory and then we'll jump into it. So when we see ourselves as, containing that mind and body, which is the whole of all parts, humans always have that gut instinct factor, and we sense and we know. So when we have an emotion such as anger, our physical bodies show signs of that, like we talked about in the last slide, like the clenched jaw or the frown. And when we have direct contact with others, the physical and emotional parts of us show up and they're intertwined together. But over the last few years, I've become a lot more self-aware of my internal feelings rather than living on autopilot. And when I acknowledge my emotional states and communicate these to others, well, this shows a lot more greater vulnerability. This process allows me to bring my full self into encounters with others. So that's really what it means to be a real physical being. Okay. So I'm going to give you a recent scenario that leads into the exercise. So this is a story of a recent client who arrived in an online therapy group and was demonstrating high anxiety and anger. But how did I know this? Well, her eyebrows were furrowed, her physical body was shut off, and she had the mute button on. So now that we're all working kind of on video or working from home, sometimes through the screen, you can kind of tell, the different emotions that people are feeling. But a group member in our therapy session noticed she was closed off and asked her how she was holding up and if she wanted to contribute. And her response was quite explosive. So she was angry at the political and economic and social divisions that are really kind of plaguing our world today. So it's a very relevant topic. So this young lady was so upset that she was literally seeing red and she was no longer present. She was unable to see the rest of the group in our online therapy session. In fact, she even didn't want to be there at all. She just wanted to leave and shut everything down. So we had a core challenge, like how do we reorient the client to become present in the moment and just sit in the discomfort of her emotions? Well, there's a series of next steps that we conducted, and I'm just going to scroll down because I see people in the chat. So her anger, first of all, brought energy into the entire container. So it affected everybody. And in order to de-escalate the tension, the young woman was just simply asked to breathe. So to draw in a large breath and do a slow exhale. Very simple. And next, she was asked to stand up, just simply walk in her space, acknowledge her environment. And when she returned, she felt much more present and at least was able to speak. And she was also asked, because I know when there's a large group of us, it can feel overwhelming in an online situation. So she was asked to simply pick one member on the screen, pin that person, and then just simply express her emotion. So not complicated stuff, very straightforward. And the result was actually quite fantastic. She was able to stabilize her nervous system. She shifted her physical self and was able to at least adjust and be present and come back to us. And then also when she spoke with the one person, it certainly grounded her as well. So all this to say, it was a very positive experience for her. And that leads into our exercise. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly walk through the objective and then the steps. So this one's very straightforward. You've probably done something like this before. We're so used to now spending all of our time on screens, which are two-dimensional. We as humans are three-dimensional. So sometimes that poses a little bit of a challenge for us. So this exercise is really just trying to get us back into ourselves, allow us to have more contact with others and our environment. So let's just do this together very quickly. Take a moment and just simply look up and look beyond your screen. And take 2 or 3 deep inhales and exhales. I usually just do 2. You can stand up, stretch, change your perspective. I'm just going to put my arms up for a minute and stretch it out. And if you are standing up, you're welcome to return back to your seat and just simply gauge how you're feeling from that. It's just a simple reorientation, much like we did in the story of the woman who was having some challenges in our group therapy. Okay, well, this is all wonderful, but how do we apply this exercise to a coaching situation? Well, next time you're facilitating a contentious video conference call, like a heated retro, you may want to start off the call with a technique like this, or even kind of prep people beforehand. So breath and body work will just automatically calm the nervous system. It will allow people to become more present in the moment. And the simple gesture of just shifting the body, especially away from online, and getting them back into their environment will allow that greater space for openness and receptivity. And reorienting your clients. So during team calls, I know this from experience, sometimes I will just simply ask people to, hey, you know what? We've been on a call for about an hour. Let's just take a moment. Let's pause and let's do that simple gaze away from our laptop and into our environment. And then I usually ask people how they're feeling in the moment. And when people say they feel something, I generally inquire a little bit more, like, where are you feeling it? Is it your head, your heart, your stomach? Are you tingling in the feet? So getting people to describe their sensation in the body actually brings them into the moment as well. So very, very simple exercise to get everyone started. So before we proceed, our first exercise, pretty simple. It was to illustrate that we are more than just our brains. There are bodies attached as well. And it's important that we have that awareness of our internal state. That way we can bring our full self in. And like my friend in the the group therapy session, asking her to remain in the call and being a part really stretched her. It builds resilience. Staying in our uncomfortableness allows us to kind of grow and deepen and just hold on a little bit longer. Oops, give me 1 second here. There we go. Okay, so Gestalt as truth-telling. So we're going to head in to our second exercise very soon. Yeah, that's Kyle. That's an awesome step 1 check-in for a retro. It is quite effective. So Gestalt as truth-telling, again, a little bit of theory. So acknowledging our inner states is a form of truth-telling, both to ourselves and to others. And when we communicate our inner states to others, we are in fact truth-telling our vulnerability. And a part of truth-telling is knowing our habits, especially those that run on autopilot. So I'll give you a quirky example. I like to put my toothpaste back in a particular spot on the shelf each night. I didn't realize this until recently, but I get like this micro sense of self-satisfaction. So this was something I was doing subconsciously until I brought it into the forefront and brought awareness to it. So the point is, when we look after our full range of emotional states, it's tending a garden. We become more alive in our fullness when we operate at this higher range of acknowledgement. And the more self-aware we become, we begin to recognize those triggers that, make us shut down or react in a certain way. All right. Now we're going to talk about the empty chair exercise. Yes. So this is a classic Gestalt approach, and it really focuses on that interpersonal or internal conflict. It shifts perspectives. You're able to view a perspective that's quite different from another and gain insights into those feelings and behaviors. But since we're limited by our screens, I'm going to explain the experiment rather than conduct this one. So again, at any point in time, if you have a question, just put it in the chat. So from an Agile coach perspective, this exercise is useful when individuals or teams are experiencing a contentious conflict situation, maybe with another person, another team, or the system itself. So you can use this experiment when you want to get inside the mind of a customer as well. So the empty chair exercise can be used when you're coaching one-on-one, or you can even do a modified version of what I would call an empty couch if you have more people. And you can also modify it online if you want to get creative and open up a brand new Zoom call with it, maybe with a different account, and place an empty chair. So I'll just show you really quickly. Here's a funny, you can see where I live. Chair right beside me, it's empty. And it has a sign on it that says, "My dad." All right. So if we walk through the instruction together, then I'll just give you a quick personal example. All right. So yes, you can place that empty chair in a room. Maybe once we're back post-COVID, or as I said, you could put it into a video call and you ask clients, plural, to pretend that the person or the team or the thing or whatever it is actually sitting in that chair, sitting across from them. And then with that empty chair, the client is asked to picture or envision what it is that they actually want to say to the person in the chair, and what kind of emotion, what have they been experiencing, what are all of those thoughts that they were too afraid to say, but they are more easily able to say it to that chair. So it's sort of directing all of that energy and being able to effectively communicate what it is that you really want to say to that person or thing that's in the chair. And then you can switch. You can do a little role playing. If you want to envision what it's like to be the person sitting in the chair, you can certainly move and then go back and forth and have a conversation by role playing. So I hope I explained that well enough. Do let me know if there's any confusion about the empty chair exercise, or if you've seen something like this before. Hmm. Yes, yes. So from, I hope I'm saying your name right, Neil or Niall, this is somatic work. That is absolutely correct. So Gestalt very much does embody somatic work and also talk therapy practices. So it is a combination of both. Yeah, so if I think about a personal example with the empty chair, and I actually did this exercise fairly recently with a therapist, and I had a conversation with my dad. Of course, my dad wasn't there in person. It was with the empty chair. And my struggle is that, my dad can sometimes suffer from narcissistic tendencies. And I do feel that he makes decisions based on his own needs first. I'm sure we all know people a little bit like this. And don't get me wrong, I love my dad, but sometimes there are some challenges. But through this exercise, I was able to finally communicate my emotions to him that I never would have been able to do in person. And this was a huge release. So I was able to kind of try on what it feels like to embody being my dad when I sat in that empty chair. And I also discovered that I didn't acknowledge him enough. So the result of that is that I have a deeper sense of empathy for my dad. I have a deeper understanding of who he is now through that conversation. And I'm also more easily able to reorient my own behavior and was able to smooth my relationship with my dad. So yes, it can be used in the clinical kind of private client session, but also you can certainly use this in your Agile coaching techniques as well. Does anyone have any questions on the empty chair exercise? Okay. Oops, there we go. All right, so let's just do a really quick recap before we move into the third and final exercise. Okay, so the empty chair technique, as we said, it is a method of truth telling. We are able to finally express those emotions, feelings that maybe we were too afraid to communicate before, but now we're able to do that in a safe space. We're able to kind of try on or pretend what it's like through the experiment to wear the shoes of the other. This is a tool for fresh perspectives. Also, it can be used to de-escalate some heated situations. And it also helps to build empathy. Okay, and let's move in. Yeah, so Brian, as an Agile coach, do you often have team members that don't want to participate in the exercises? Assuming so, what is usually needed to change a mind and do it? It's a great question. So yes, I have definitely encountered this situation before. Usually, if we're right in the middle of a coaching session, and if the person doesn't want to participate, I generally just let them acknowledge it, and I just let them observe. I don't want them to come off the call, but I just let them be as they are. Usually after the call, I'll loop in and more have a bit of a one-on-one with the individual just to kind of gauge, what is it maybe that's making them uncomfortable? So just asking kind of powerful questions around that. And also understanding that not every exercise suits everybody. So perhaps there's an activity we can do in the future that better suits their needs as well. So I hope I answered your question, Brian. Okay, so back to discovering the quality of our interactions. Okay. Yes, so the quality of our interactions are dependent upon how in touch we are with our internal thoughts, emotions, and feelings. So the more connected we are to self, the more connected we will be to others. And the opposite is quite true. So I know this all sounds easy in words. However, when we live in this constant self-connectedness, that is really the challenging part. Okay, so I'm just going to move some of the boxes I have here on my screen so I can see it a little bit better. Yes, so let's look at the final exercise, and that is communicating our intentions. So in this exercise, we're going to, quite obviously, communicate our intentions to another. We will develop a greater understanding of what it is and is not within our control, and also take responsibility for our actions. So I'm just going to give you some instruction here. Yeah, so first you can use this exercise that we're going to do partially tonight in Agile teams when you're forming, storming, or with mature teams seeking to establish or reestablish commitments and responsibilities to one another. So we're going to perform part of this exercise tonight. Now, if you were to do it with your teams in the full scenario, it would probably take about 10 minutes. Excuse me. Yes. Okay, so the following instructions can be used for any one of the following statements that you see kind of in below where it says instruction, and pick one. So you can perform this exercise alone, as we will tonight, or with teams, and you can pair off in online breakout rooms. So when you're working with teams, do ask the participants to maintain eye contact with their partner and talk directly with that person. Partners will then take turns saying these sentences to each other that begin with the words, I have to, or picking any from the list. Okay, so why don't we do a quick practice? So for tonight then, I'm going to ask all of you to simply pick one of these on the list. So I'm going to pick I have to, I choose to. So you can pick any one of the four. And what I'm going to ask you to do is say the first part of the sentence out loud and pretend, because I'm assuming we're all kind of individual on our own here watching this, but pretend you are conversing with someone you know. So for example, I have to. So make a mental list of the things that you have to do. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of what I have to do. So I have to coach someone who is resisting my assistance. I have to speak with a difficult client tomorrow. I have to manage the work of someone who is not pulling his weight. So I'm going to pause for a moment, and in the chat, let me just move this over a little bit so I can see my examples. So in the chat, I would love to hear if you have any current examples from these 4 on the list. Okay, we'll just give it a moment. Kyle, I choose to drink a beer. Awesome. I hope it's a delicious craft beer. Marty, I need to find new employment. Yep, we have all been through that one for sure. Any others? Janet, I'd like to explore the resistance of my new team to continuous improvement. I feel you. Okay, so now that we have a few examples here, Brian, I have to revisit prioritization necessity with POs. Yeah, that's a tough one. Okay, so now we're going to go back to all the sentences that you just said. And I want you to replace, so I chose I have to, I choose to, but we're going to replace, so let's see, yes, so for Karen, for example, I have to generate sprint summary metrics. We're now going to focus on the later part of that, and that's I choose to. So the later part of your sentence. So we're going to reorient how we speak. And so let me just start here. So yes, now go back to the sentence. Replace, I have to, for example, with I choose to, and recognize that you have the power to make a choice, even if it's in between 2 undesirable alternatives. So take time to feel how aware you are in your experience of saying each sentence that begins with like, I choose to, or I won't, or I want, or I'd like to, and add any sentence that comes to you next. So I'm going to give you some examples of what I'm talking about. Yeah, so Kyle, that's right, precisely. This is definitely a part of that fixed versus growth mindset. Good catch. So I choose to coach someone who is resisting my assistance and seek to understand the person better. I'll give you 2 more quick examples. I choose to speak with a difficult client tomorrow with a goal of finding a new solution. And finally, I choose to manage the work of someone who is not pulling his weight one time only and will communicate my challenge with him. Yeah, so you can see how it reorients the sentence and allows us to look at the challenge in a different light. Do any of you have any kind of examples of reorienting your I have to's to I choose to's? Feel free to write them in the chat as well. Yeah, I have to drink a beer. How would you reorient I have to drink a beer? That's a funny one. Okay, so as we wait and see if there's any examples coming in, so what is the outcome of this exercise? Well, Notice how the switch from like I have to I choose to becomes much more intention based. My perspective reorients as I have a better understanding of what it is and is not in my power. And I have full responsibility now of my actions. Yeah, so let's see here. I have to drink a beer. I choose to drink a delicious craft beer. Good choice. I choose to generate sprint summary metrics. And finally, Janet, I choose to work with the team to discover continuous improvements they're interested in and have them experiment. I am noticing a trend with some of your examples. I feel like we've switched from something maybe kind of heavy to something, it's like a new, fresh perspective that I'm reading, and that's great. And Brian, let's read yours. I choose to revisit prioritization and understand PO reluctance when they understand it is their responsibility. Yes. So in your coaching, you can certainly, use this exercise with people, especially those who can sometimes be a bit more challenging or stubborn, and do this wordplay with them and see if it changes their perspective and their intention. And if you perform this exercise in a group, it's really at this point in time that you may want to take a few moments to debrief with them. Okay, there we go. So, Marty, I want to read yours as well. So I want to find new employment in an area that will satisfy me and not just pay the bills. Yes, it sounds like you're looking for a very fulfilling career. Okay, so when you do the debrief with your clients, you can ask them the following 3 questions. Did you feel that you had the ability to take control of your choices? What did you discover more in your choice? And did you find that you found more personal power and possibility? And then what do you recognize in the words of your partner to be true if they're partnered up, either online or in person? Okay. Yeah, so let's recap our 3 exercises together. So first and foremost, we looked at the screen exercise, which was very much kind of modeled in mindfulness, had a lot of mindfulness practices. And our objective there was really to become more present in the moment with ourself, with others, and our environment. Our outcome there, we talked about that mind-body connection, that we're not just this head, we're not just here to intellectualize, but we actually are connected, and we certainly feel our states of being. And so having that awareness really bring us into a whole self. And then we talked about, remember that remaining in that discomfort allows us to build resilience. Then we shifted over to the empty chair exercise, one of my personal favorites. And that was to work through that interpersonal and internal conflict. So we were able to kind of try on what it feels like to be that other person, gain insights into the internal feelings and behaviors. So if you recall, this was a method of truth telling. So sometimes we're able to express things to that empty chair that we may have been too afraid to say otherwise. And it is very experiential, experimental, trying on what it feels like to be in the shoes of the other. And then again, this was that aid to de-escalate those tension kind of situations. And finally, the exercise we just finished was really about communicating intentions and developing that better understanding of what is or is not within our control, and really taking responsibility for our actions. We get to learn about more choice and personal power and what possibilities exist. And again, if you're working in pairs on this, it's also recognizing those personal truths and seeing what is the reality between the two people. Okay. So to conclude, let's tie it all together then. So if we align all of these exercises back to the core Gestalt practices, we talked about in the very beginning, how in Gestalt there is that focus on what happens today in the here and now. And as we said, it looked a lot into sort of mindfulness activities and that practice of awareness. My personal favorite statement is that reflective observer and truth teller, which we really see as a core element both in Agile coaching and of course in Gestalt practices. And really in all of these exercises, it helps to orient our clients to become much more aware of what they're doing and triggers as well that will help them to shift and change. So as a final thought for our Agile coaches, you can utilize the Gestalt exercises and Gestalt psychotherapy practices with your clients to develop those greater truths, deeper awareness, and of course, resolving the horizontal and the vertical team, individual, and organizational conflict. So just a few more slides. I just wanted to let you know, because I believe we have people from all over the world tonight on our call. So Gestalt is worldwide. It does have a very large presence, as you can see, in the United States. Okay, and I love to connect with people, so I'm always happy to connect with you on social media, and in particular on the Medium platform. Medium is where I do a lot of writing on these topics that we explored tonight, and much, much more. Okay, and that's all I have for tonight. So I'm ready for the questions. Okay, let's see here. We've got some questions in the chat. Just scrolling down. I know psychological counseling is not easily accessible because it deals with human wounds. Untrained beginners should not try this easily. Is that right? Yeah, so thank you for asking that question. What I tried to do, I mean, there are so many different experiments and exercises. I chose the ones that I felt would be most suitable to repurpose and use in an organizational context. So the point of tonight isn't to really, go deep into those interpersonal relationships with folks at work. Rather, it's to use these exercises more to delve into maybe some complexities that are happening in the workplace instead. So if I think about the empty chair, for example, let's say it's a team that's struggling with another team and there's maybe some hostilities. Well, they could use that empty chair to maybe at least vent some frustration, say what they need to say before they actually go in and recalibrate and have those kind of deeper conversations that they need to have. So that's one quick example. And I think that's why I also wanted to stress in the beginning that the main differences between an Agile coach and psychotherapist is you're not dealing with those deep personal challenges. Question 2. Agile considers failure and attempt important, but isn't a psychotherapy approach inappropriate? That's a great question. I've never thought about that before. Well, I think with anything in life, it is all about trying new techniques. So what comes to mind when I read this Oh, okay. Thanks, Mary. So I had a therapy session not too long ago. And I just found that the exercise that I was using with the patient wasn't working. So it's not to say that was a failure. It was just an attempt. It was something to try. And I think that's what Gestalt is all about as well, is trying something. If it doesn't work, you shift, you move, you continue to try something else until it fits. So there's never a right or wrong. It's always just in that kind of playfulness and seeking to find the right exercise that will fit appropriately. I hope I answered that question. If not, definitely ask me something again. Okay, any others? All right, we have another one. So, how to apply psychotherapy approach or any such approach for the first time. Team client do want to feel they're being experimented. Well, one thing you could certainly do is provide a list, like a short list of different experiments that you could try together with the team, and collectively agree upon what it is that you want to try out. That way, at least your team has a voice at the table. It's not you just kind of springing something on them. They will certainly be able to choose what it is they want to try. So I think having that collaborative approach is always best so that people aren't as afraid. And then also provide enough instruction. So make sure that people feel comfortable with the experiment that they're going to try. So they're not heading into dangerous territory, that they feel psychological safety. So you may, if it's your first time, you may want to try just something very simple. I think the breathing techniques are, like we talked about in the first experiment, might be the easiest to start with. You may even want to bring in someone who maybe has some training in mindfulness. They could help maybe co-facilitate your session with you. So that's always a thought as well. Okay, no problem. Thank you, Janet. I appreciate your comments. And Alpeach, I hope I'm saying your name right. And Kyle, no problem, my pleasure. It was wonderful to be with you tonight too. I really had a great time and I appreciate your questions. Oh, okay, Brian, let's see here. Okay, it was mentioned earlier that an exercise would be a good lead-in for a retrospective. Is using the tools in existing ceremonies the usual method, or are these done in special sessions? Oh, that's a fun question. I think it's great just to mix it up. I don't know about you guys, but when I'm in the same retrospective all the time, I get super bored. I love variety. So I think bringing in some of these neat tools and techniques, either what we looked at tonight or there's many others online as well, will always mix it up for them. So I do recommend always a wide variety because you'll have far more engagement.